You have been. I am so getting my full mileage out of that Take My Breath Away music. Anyway, Ben here from the archive. Imagine that. And I am here to discuss episode number 78 of the archive, The Death of Analog TV. And before I get started here, I should note that this is one of my little time capsule commentaries. In other words, I am recording this before the episode comes out, so I don't know how this has been received. And having said that, I sense that this is going to be an episode that I'm going to take some pretty serious complaints over. I've been getting the suggestion for this episode forever, and so I'm kind of expecting to hear, why didn't you try and do this right on the anniversary, or why didn't you save this for the final episode of Archive, or is this really the last episode of Archive? That's kind of what I'm expecting to hear, and I'm sure there will be some smart-ass comments in the comment section on YouTube for this particular posting as well, but what you gonna do? Anyway, Death of Analog TV, final episode of Season 3, and as I said, an episode I've been getting suggestions for a long time, and one of those episodes, those very rare episodes really, where I know I'm going to do it at some point or other, but it's an issue of when, and when would it be most effective to do so. So, initially, in all the times I've gotten this suggestion, my idea has been for it to be more of like the technical difficulties episode, where it's more riffs and clips and montages and just all around, hopefully a little less formal, but I knew that wasn't going to happen, so here we go. After Web TV, I knew that I was going to do something for the final episode of the season, obviously, and it was going to hinge on, Death of Analog TV was going to hinge on what kind of episode was it going to be. If it was going to be more of a history lesson, I would go ahead and do it, and if it was going to be more of a clip show and a more, in my opinion, true air of finality, then I would sit on it for whenever the final episode of Archive may be. But obviously, after Web TV, I started researching this, and it was just one of those textbook Oddity archive rabbit hole sort of topics. You'd start reading about something and you'd find another little tangent, you'd find another little bit, and you'd find that it goes a little bit farther back and a little bit farther back and on and on and on. And so obviously I did the episode. And that's my main beef with this episode, really, because yeah, I had it in my head that this would be more a little less formal, but the problem when I have these rabbit hole topics on Archive is that, a lot of Archive viewers can get pretty nitpicky about things, and so I do try and keep that in mind, but I also want it to be watchable, and I want it to have, if it's a history lesson sort of thing, something that's more linear and something that I can have a more straight path getting from point A to point B. So I think I was kind of able to do that here, but just trying to round up all the little odd bits and pieces of all this and trying to make it coherent and watchable, I don't know if I really quite accomplished that. And there's, just this bit here, the Mac system in Europe, the Mac standard, which never happened. That's another road that I could have gone down. So it became more about, as I implied, trying to just make things flow a little better. And I don't know if it really happened because trying to keep it a little more succinct, I was trying to make it less, not spending too much time on one thing, I guess is the best way to put it. And then here's another problem here, this little still from a bad PAL to NTSC transfer. The Muse system in Japan, I've read a few places that ghosting was a problem in motion shots. And of course, I go and I try and find some clips of Japanese TV that hopefully were on that standard, and I can't really find anything to really confirm that. So it's another one of those things where you just kind of have to take it at the word of once you've seen it in enough places and not necessarily word for word that you kind of have to go, yeah, the odds are it probably did happen. It's not my favorite sort of thing because I like it when I can confirm it. And that still I showed about a minute ago now. That's not even a very good representation of that because you can see more the scan lines, compression, artifacting, and stuff because it was obviously something that somebody had taken from a DVD and had ripped with handbrake, and you kind of have the scan lines going across and stuff. So you don't even really get to see the ghosting all that well, and I couldn't find any real good footage of that. And just it's a pet peeve of mine. I really don't like it when I have to kind of take the people at their word for that sort of stuff, and I can't have hard proof of everything. So yeah, it's not my favorite. The ATSC digital standard, albeit via second frequency. So it was kind of a relief to find this little retrospective from WRAL. The first HDTV broadcast in America, it also proved to be a bit of a problem because in that retrospective, the station claims that the first broadcast was August 6, 1996. But if you go online and stuff and look at all the history of TV stuff, it's listed as July 23rd. So after a little more snooping around, it was another thing that I just couldn't quite pin down, but as best as I could deduce, there was some sort of experimental broadcast on July 23rd and then a regular HD service starting in August. And of course, they just wanted to be the first on their block, first in America, first in general, to broadcast in HDTV, not because anybody was watching. I mean, you couldn't even really buy a set yet in 1996. And then fast forward to 1998 when it became no longer experimental. It was good to find some footage from newscasts, of course, almost entirely from California, like this one, of people that were like this guy who were just curious to see how much this sort of upgrade would be and what it would be to maybe overhaul his home entertainment setup, and then the rich dilettantes who just have to be the first to have everything. And I think I admittedly kind of shoehorned that little interview bit into the episode, but to me it was symptomatic of everything that was not working, certainly not up until that point about HDTV. I wanted to show more from the people that were just into it and had all the money and were just getting it for the hell of it. But it, of course, was just too much. And as I said, I think I may have shoehorned it a bit into the history lesson here. But it's one of those things that you have to sometimes make those little sacrifices. And it's one of my big pet peeves about the history lessons, trying to, as I've lamented before, trying to keep things moving, but also trying to keep things interesting and trying to keep some sort of perspective and some sort of context going. And there you go. Now, the nightlight loop that you see here, that is something that I would recommend that if you have any interest in this topic at all, going and watching. There's plenty of postings of it on YouTube, and there's the Spanish version of it. And it's kind of an interesting watch because, in retrospect at least, and doing all the research here. Oh, and by the way, that card is from a little test on is your TV ready or not for digital, which I didn't really have time to label or fit into context or anything, and so that's kind of another thing that crawls up my butt about this. This bit, K11TW, the only low power transmission recording that I could find, and trying to keep it going. And of course, I write all my stuff, my history lessons, in advance, and sometimes if I only devote a sentence or two to something, it makes it a little harder because sometimes I'll have big dry stretches like right here where I'm trying to find something to put in there for you to look at, and other times where it's like I just can't fit everything in. Anyway, the nightlight service, watch it the whole way through. It's kind of interesting to watch to see how they were treating, because it wasn't really geared towards the geek community at all. It was geared towards people that were they didn't know what they were doing. They don't watch TV a whole lot, and they kind of live in their own little world, or people that were afraid of kicking over, or people that were kind of lazy. And so watching it is, to me, actually a really interesting thing, so you can get kind of a perspective on how it was being, I hate to say marketed, but that's really what it was, trying to get those last few people to finally switch over and say, this is really it, analog. And despite the higher resolution, digital TV tends to be to be perfectly honest, when the digital TV kickover happened back in '09, I didn't really have any strong opinion on it one way or another. But I was also kind of in a place where wasn't really watching a whole lot of TV. I was working a lot, and I had cable, so I just didn't care. I mean, I still had an old tube TV, but I knew that because I had cable and I had a cable box, it didn't matter. And so at the time, it just kind of breezed past me, and it's only looking at it now, and unfortunately meaning some serious Monday morning quarterbacking, that I've been kind of able to draw some more conclusions about the whole switchover. And one thing that got to me, and that gets discussed here in this particular box segment, is that it really didn't suit any great purpose. And back at the beginning of the history lesson, you see that bit from 2020, from 1989. There's a bit that I couldn't show in there, just in the name of time. They're talking about the Japanese were first to give supposed high-definition broadcasts, although those were still analog, some sort of enhanced analog thing. But the way that 2020 tried to peddle it was that it was keeping up with the Japanese. We're losing jobs to the Japanese. We're losing ground to the Japanese. And so the way they're trying to do it is saying, well, this is what's going to really help out the American economy, which of course that's nonsense. But my feeling about it is that it was kind of, and this is as somebody who now owns an HDTV, it still seems slightly unnecessary. I mean, I like the idea of Blu-ray, and I like streaming, and I like that you can carry audio and video signal with an HD cable, HDMI cable. But in the end, does it really accomplish anything? Because I think there's ways that we could probably do it without everybody having to switch over to all this new stuff. And I guess that's maybe just the Luddite in me. And reading about it, I wasn't surprised, but I wasn't too enthused to hear that, of course, this really doesn't have anything to do with maybe bringing manufacturing back more to America or anything. But it's about opening up the airwaves so we can sell it off. Of course. And I say in that previous box segment that I'd rather have seen some of the airwaves open more to experimental broadcasts. And I'm fine with the idea, as the government was saying, experimental broadcasts and stuff. My headphones are creaking, if that's what you're hearing. I'm perfectly fine with first responders having access to the airwaves. And but it's only going to be some of the time, and in my mind, especially if you're operating your own little licensed homebrew thing and a very low wattage, that to me, I'd almost rather see that, because I think that would be something that would be more productive in the long haul to America. I think the idea of letting people learn their own way and trying to start their own ideas and get in that way, as opposed to trying to force these pie-in-the-sky notions about manufacturing and all that sort of stuff.
Our analog television signal is shutting off forever.
Has ceased regular.
So let's shift gears here to the sign-offs themselves. Initially, there was going to be a whole nother segment in here of stations that it would shut off in the middle of a newscast, and you'd watch the master engineer or one of the anchors or somebody press the button to shut things off, or, that sort of thing. But I opted not to do that because I felt like I already had that quick montage of the stations that just didn't care and just shut things off in the middle of a broadcast. And, period. That was it. And having said that, if you are interested in the topic, there's tons of clips out there of stations that would shut off their stuff in the middle of a newscast, or would have a special newscast or something. And because some of the stations were doing them that were obviously staged. You'd see some stations where somebody would be about to press the button, but they wouldn't be able to press the button, and the signal would cut off early. Or I saw a couple of clips where they had, kind of the ridiculous old-fashioned switch on the wall with the handle that you pull down. And, some of that stuff was pretty ridiculous. So it was one of those things that I was like, well, I've already got the quick montage, as I said, so I'll let it slide. Now, with the final batch of sign-off clips here, the last one, I don't note it in the episode, and it's also probably my favorite one. It's from WNBC in New York, and you see the color bars and the incomplete history of the NBC logos and stuff, but that actually came at the end of Nightlight service. That was not the sign-off that occurred when they ceased their regular broadcasting. That was at the end of their... I think they used all 30 days that they were allowed to run the Nightlight service. So that's just a little bit of trivia there. And some of these clips I had to cut way down, like this one that's just finishing here, because of the songs being used. So you've got... here's another example. This one from WFAA in Dallas, I believe. And it's a bit of Neil Diamond's African Suite being played there. So I had to cut it way down to hopefully stay on YouTube's good side. And the one before that from Indianapolis, I believe, was Sandy Patty's version of the Star Spangled Banner, which came out on A&M, so a big label thing. And one of those irritating as hell things about YouTube is sometimes you'll have a song in there that's in the public domain, but you'll get all these people trying to claim rights to it. So there's a reason why I did my own version of Star Spangled Banner to finish this thing out, which I'll get to in a minute. But in this montage, I intentionally only played a few seconds of it, and I'd edit the thing at kind of weird times, just so, hopefully I wouldn't get nailed. So far, so good. And so while we're on the topic of Star Spangled Banner, let's discuss that. The final bit of my own little homebrew sign-off, where you see a montage of little bits and pieces from archive past episodes. I knew I wanted to actually play it. And initially, the lazy person in me just wanted to go to archive.org and find a public domain version recording of, like, a government version, a U.S. government version of it, and use it there. But I just didn't want to deal with it. And the more that I thought about it, it seemed just appropriate that I would play it myself. Because I have this kind of nasty habit as a guitarist to play just very skeletal versions of things. And the more I thought about it, it just seemed appropriate. So it seemed like the right thing to do for me to do my own version of the Star Spangled Banner, and that it fits the mood of the archive. And I should also note that the idea of clips, I'm not making fun of the Star Spangled Banner. I'm really not. The joke, and it's admittedly slightly obscure, but if you watch enough sign-off clips, and you certainly can these days with this newfangled internet thing and all, you can notice that a lot of the stations that had their own kind of homebrew version of a Star Spangled Banner montage, to sign off to, would show just stuff from around their town, not necessarily the American flag or anything, and airplanes flying overhead right now, by the way. Don't you just love this stuff? Anyway, it was meant as a parody of those homebrew sort of sign-off clips. So it wasn't meant as any kind of swipe at the Star Spangled Banner. That's another complaint I'm expecting. And then this bit here, yes, I know it's recycled from the Great Archive Treasure Hunt, but it just seemed right. And I was kicking around the idea of redoing it, and I just realized that, in terms of just explicitly albums and videos and little bits of technology, things haven't really changed that much in archive land to where a new version would be worth it. And I knew that I wanted to kind of reference my original sign-off parody from way back in one of the first episodes, like the out of practice seal the television code thing. So it just seemed appropriate that the idea of bringing things full circle, and we might as well just kind of retrace our steps in a way. And yeah, that's really about all I have to say about this episode. We're down to the last 3 minutes or so. Don't think I'm going to fill them all, but, this episode's got its flaws, but I did what I could. For those of you concerned about this being the final episode of Archive, I would say stick around after the credits of the original version, not necessarily this particular recording. And with that, I guess I'll let this Star Spangled Banner version play out. It seems kind of rude to even talk over it. So, I'll just shut up now. Ben here from the Archive, signing off.